Everyone, can I just draw us to conclusion? Sometimes you get the best spot, other times you don't. At the end of the day, we're all tired, we've been challenged, but what a fantastic day that was. And, I have to say, I often will come and listen to people speak, but to hear the calibre, the insights and the capability of all of those today, I feel very privileged to have heard and been challenged. So thank you to all those that have participated. And this is, we're not going to use the full time. I just want to tell you we're going to truncate. And I learned this in politics. I spoke at a surf club every year, and 1 year, normally it went for about 60 minutes, maybe 90 minutes tops. And they got their MP up to speak. I got up 1 year at the 2.5 hour mark, and I read the room. I said, great club, great year, see you next year, and I got a standing ovation. So, so I'm not kind of, great day, go democracy, let's go. I'm not going to do that, but we're going to do a version of that very quickly. But I don't want to lose the opportunity with the chairs and you here, just to get some reflections in terms of what you think are the priorities going forward. From my point of view, I've started a new role, which is an unbelievable privilege at Susan McKinnon Foundation, McKinnon for short. It's an organisation that believes on the power of better government and the impact that can have on a stronger country, a stronger Australia. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because we've heard a lot about where government has failed today. But there is a belief that actually good government can make a difference, and we have had good leaders and good government. Indeed, one of the things we've done at McKinnon is acknowledge political leaders have done great things. Next week, we're acknowledging Dominic Perrottet and Chris Minns, who ran a state campaign that actually didn't go into personal attacks. It was quite respectful, and it stood above, and it stood out as actually you can have discourse in a respectful way on policies and not bring people into it. So that's being acknowledged. Bridget Archer's being acknowledged for standing up for corruption, as in having an independent corruption commission, National Commission Against Corruption, which somehow got political. How that did, I don't know. I'll say that. But we have to celebrate, and we heard a bit about that, celebrating democracy, but also good leadership, because I can tell you as a political leader, and I stand here as one of those in the last 25 years that didn't get a great rap by the sounds of things. Indeed, but it's true. There haven't been great examples, but there are good examples. And, we need to hold to account those that aren't and celebrate those that are. That's I think, a thing from my point of view. And I think, political leadership, our institutions and democracy, and this is kind of the McKinnon Foundation, has never been more important than right now. And that's why we're here today, and I think that's the important thing. So what I'll get the panel to do, and I'll just give a quick outline, trying to synthesise what I think I heard, some of the key issues, but maybe a quick reflection, and then one point that you think's a takeaway, and then we'll go to the room in terms of reflection. So, as I look, I think this is what I heard, that this polycentric, I think there's multiple elements to democracy. There's multi-elements to the problem, but a big part of it, I think, is where governments haven't focused not only on the short term, but not the long term, and that has started to break down. The performance and delivery, the listening, the policy that's addressing the real issues, the challenges they're facing and seeing, are not being addressed. And that kind of breakdown, I think, then leads to a loss of trust in governments, in institutions. They're feeling less optimistic, we heard, in terms of some of the data, and a lower quality of life. And I think, good government, enhancing the capability of our leaders, giving them the research and policy and trying to attract more talent into public service is part of what we're doing at McKinnon. But the things that I wrote down that I heard where we need action or attention or were brought to in quite graphic ways to our consciousness through what was spoken today, we need, and these might be things you want to talk about or comment on. More participation came through strongly. more information, so things like transparency, using collective intelligence through data, integrity of data as it's brought, engaging our young people, which seems something that's quite surprisingly, it seems like a dominant theme, I think I heard. More partnerships, the democracy sausage. I mean, I like that because it's quite easy to understand, but isn't it? That's celebrating democracy. Something that we take for granted is so important because it's compulsory voting, it's on a Saturday, we get together with differences and we vote different ways as we go in, but we're one. And I think that was a really good message. Mis and disinformation came up, where a beak came up. I can't remember where that was, where a beak, but there was certainly beak. And you know, I think Catherine, who I think's gone, she raised something that, you know, that third rail, and you know, I'll just reflect on this before I hand to the panel. Like I participated in the voluntary assisted dying debate, and it doesn't matter what my view was or where I went, but you know, I did a few pieces, and it struck me, you know, it wasn't, I mean, I had a position where those against many were quite aggressively against, but there was a group in the middle that said, you know, thank you for the contribution, because even though I disagree with you, I felt you listened. I felt that you were doing it in a respectful way. And it was very simple, but I thought, oh, isn't that interesting? That these sort of debates were run to one side of the room or the other. You know, people are actually willing to listen to it. People listen on both sides and have an understanding that your view is different. And we seem to have lost that. So I think that's something that's stuck with me. So when I go to the panel, Christina, do you want to go last or do you want to go first?
I'll go last.
You go first? Okay, we'll go over to Peter. And Peter, I'm still trying to, you know, when you said you didn't like civics and then your next class you didn't like, you know, I'll leave that alone. But on many things, you've excelled at civics, so. Someone got it, yeah, someone got it. So reflection of the day, and anything you think that we should focus on.
So my reflection on the day comes back to that wonderful opening session. It seems to me that the strengths we've got in Australia are part to do with that small part of democracy, which is the contest. I actually think we do it well. We've got an independent Australian Electoral Commission, we have compulsory voting, and we have a system where time after time the leader of the party that loses the election accepts that with some good faith. You know, those are important things. I think there is one issue there, going back to the democracy sausage, which I think is important, is I don't think we're thinking through enough what is the impact now of every election, increasing numbers of people voting early, before the election, even before the campaign has scarcely begun. I think we need to think that through. But the parts where we've got to make change, I hear from everyone, is what happens between the 3 or 4 years elections. You've got to somehow make sure that people know that there is democratic governance going on between those elections. And we know there are different ways we can do it, but we're doing it to a limited extent. And I think what people are increasingly feeling is that elites get a voice through lobbying, but many people are not having that same impact. I think there is a challenge. I think we saw it in the referendum, of people being sick and tired, as they see it, of being told how to think by those at the top. So we've got to, I think, find ways in which we can engage people, including young people, in our democratic processes. And I heard that time and time again during the day.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Peter. Peter.
So look, I think the quality of democracy tends to go in cycles, and at the moment, globally, it's in a downturn. If I were to sort of try and put my finger on what's at the heart of this, I think politics struggles with substance in the current environment. And that leads to large levels of dissatisfaction. It leads to a sense that the political system is not paying attention to what matters most, and it erodes trust. So a political system that's delivering substance will not have any of those problems at the end of the day. And the question is, how do you get to that point? Now, I think it's easy to be very critical and dismissive of the quality of political leadership, and to say, just go back to, Hawke, Keating, Howard days and pursue a big agenda. But this is a difficult environment for political leaders to actually pursue a big agenda, in part because their political antennae, in my view, have been completely distorted by social media and technology. Old-fashioned politicians, and you'd know this better than I would, Mike, had an instinctive feel for where the centre of gravity of an issue lay in the community. I think the current generation of politicians really struggle. So anything we can do to signal the value of substance as voters and as members of the community maybe can help us move away from politics as sloganeering and politics as substantial delivery. And I'll make one other point, and that is the public service has an important role to play in this. And I think at the moment, the way the public service operates does not help with bringing substance before political decision makers. For the most part, our public service, which is staffed by bright people, are focused on second and third order issues. And they're focused on second and third order issues because they happen to be first order political issues. And the first order substantive policy issues are, to use Catherine's term, the third rail. In other words, you can't go near them. So we need to find a way to shift that culture in the public service and to give the public service more room for genuinely frank and fearless, to use the cliche, advice to go to ministers. But if I can end on an optimistic note, democracies, in my view, in the long term, are self-correcting, genuine democracies, because they are by design intended to respond to the will of the people and what people want. So I know we'll go through periods of despair in this discussion, but I remain a long-term optimist about the ability of democratic systems to self-correct.
That's great, Peter. Yeah, and look, as a modern politician, I can understand that. But no, look, I think there's 2 points there I'll pick up on, Peter. I think that substance issue, the public service have it and know it. So one of the things that kept me awake at night was the long-term gap of health funding. We do not have the capacity, the revenue, to meet the health needs of the community. Not just sort of now we're running over, but in the next 10 years it gets worse and worse and worse. So why are we not dealing with that now? That was a challenge. And the public service have ideas and approaches, and so it's how do we get that sort of issue to the top, on substance. And the second is connected. In the last election at the state, Dom Perrottet took a strong view on gambling reform. Now there's lots of vested interests in that, as you can imagine. He was attacked across many different ways, and social media is used. There's all types of things that come. But interestingly, what came through in terms of research is that people resonated with it because he was standing up against those sense, because there's a view that all the lobbyists kind of run around behind closed doors. He's making a stand on actual policy that's going to make a difference to people that are vulnerable and all types of things. It came through in his actual polling. So the substance of an issue and taking a stand can, be, good policy can be good government, you know, and I think that's the intersection, and encouraging that. You know, why I want to call out political leaders, I mean, there's a group, there's a social media site led by donkeys, and it goes around highlighting poor political leadership across the world, and, you know, quite ridiculous. So, and there's plenty of material, but the point is that that's not the only thing, and, you know, that's where the focus is. But, you know, so I think good points. So, Sally.
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to come out of the closet as a technological optimist in the terms of democracy. I think it is, while I understand the very real concerns around social media, I think it is too easy just to blame things on social media and then talk about shutting it down for children. And I will give a few reasons why I think that. I really loved the last session because that really spoke to a lot of work that I've been engaged in and actually what I've noticed. So, the printing press was an enormously democratically empowering piece of technology. Empowering communities with digital technologies for communication, amongst themselves to politicians is equally empowering. We have messed it up, but that doesn't mean we can't get it right going forward. Just as the printing press, you read stuff, what they said about the printing press when it came out, it was going to be the end of the world. There was learned societies coming out and one of the reasons I feel so strongly about this is two experiences. One of them was meeting Audrey Tang, who at the age of 15 mobilised the youth of Taiwan and via digital platforms, which he had algorithms which were designed to tell people what really they had in common. And anyway, I won't go into details. The upshot of it was they used this to get the education department to change practices in classrooms, and that was a 15-year-old using technology. My own and when I talk to people about that here, all I'm told is that's Taiwan, we're different, don't try it. So I think that it may just be Taiwan. We may not get there, but to just dismiss it and not even try it, I think is really not very courageous of us, and I think we need to be a bit more courageous than we have been. And I'm really pleased to say that, I've been working with the Department of Education. I think the way forward in terms of engaging people who make policy, improving democracy, is to recognise their fears. I mean, the Department of Education's not all that. They made us take AI out of everything we were doing. But we have now got to a point where they are talking to us about using their chatbot in classroom to collect in real time. They haven't actually signed on the dotted line, so I'm not going to count my chickens before they hatch. But to actually understand what's going on in the classroom, what works, what innovations in classrooms work to help children finish school well. So I want to end on that note. I think I just want to take my hats off to the last session, because I think we're focusing too much on our fears and not enough on the next generation coming through and what technology actually could do for them if we had a serious attempt at making it work in a really positive way.
Great. Well said, sir. Well done. Yep, well said. So, Christina, take us home.
No, I won't, but I want to start going back to what I thought was quite an inspirational first theoretical piece, because what it did was throw the responsibility straight into our court. The polycentric model means that our Royal Society, the civil service, all of these other parts of the structures which support an elected democracy have got to sort of stand up, come up to the and start being engaged. And I think that is a very good message for us, because we're part of the groups where we're discussing these and trying to think ways forward, and I found that very helpful. On the other hand, I quoted Ed Koper, who set up GetUp, who has got a fantastic new book, but he said, tweaking the algorithm of what information we digest will not reinvent the golden age of journalism or restore trust in honest politicians. So the issue is not for us to try and think nostalgically about what was actually never as golden as all that. And indeed, in my lifetime, Rupert Murdoch moved to Adelaide, where I was born, and set up the news. So there's been ups and downs all the time. But we do need to be really proactive, I think, thinking not just about children, but about these new technologies, about trying to work really closely with the regulatory structures. And I think that what Carly has done, this battle where she says we need technology and regulation in privacy law, that's the right way for us to think about it. And of course that's going to mean, and my colleagues in the sort of WTO community are appalled, because what happens if you have more data regulation is that digital international trade slows down. And slower trade, less free trade, pushes up prices. I mean, I'm not an economist, but that's what happens. So it's going to have impacts, and we're going to have to think those to's and fro's, and I feel very much the same about social media and children. Of course you worry about what, I mean, partly because I don't use social media all that much except for LinkedIn, which is a bit lame, really. And so, but we do need to start thinking about, and I think that other side of the polycentric model is the community. And it really does mean that we need to be more engaged. And I found that today very, very interesting. I have to say, I thought this Strengthening Australian Democracy, of which there are still some copies there, which Jenny Whalen talked about, was actually a case study in polycentric action. And it's really, I think, quite impressive. I've only looked at a few pages of it. So I think it is happening. But I do think that we're all going to have to stand up and start thinking about it, and thinking about things we don't want to think about, like pornography on the internet, which I don't want to think about.
Great. Okay. Well done, Christina. Well done. I think that's a good balance from the panel. That there is obviously concerns and various actions and approaches got to take, but also optimism. You know, and I think it's the two together. To me, that's a big part of the day. So, anyone want to comment? We'll have a few minutes. So reflection and/or question. Yep, and then just we'll get the microphones.
Yeah, I'm one of the old politicians. In his excellent keynote address this morning, Professor Pettit talked about democracies, and he said the health of democracies depends on the strength of the checks and balances that were present. And we see around the world at the moment systematic attempts to dismantle checks and balances in many countries. President Trump has said that he'll dismantle one of the checks and balances in the Department of Justice. President Netanyahu tried to make the judiciary subsidiary to the Knesset. What should be done to protect those checks and balances?
Reflection.
Peter Varghese is the one who's got to take that.
Well, I thought one of the many interesting things that Philip Petit said was that the elites are playing a very important role in, I think he said, constraining anti-majoritarianism or constraining majoritarianism. And to my mind, there are pluses and minuses on that. So what is to be done is that we need to be constantly vigilant about the weakening of the guardrails and the institutional scaffolding that supports democracy. And that goes to questions such as the rule of law, it goes to the independence of the judiciary, it goes to the integrity of our electoral machinery, and it goes to trying to maintain a broad social consensus on what the red lines are within the public sphere. So you can have a different view about all sorts of things, but a democracy which doesn't understand its red lines, I think, is going to be in trouble. And we will see how far Donald Trump goes in dismantling many of those guardrails. He may succeed in going very far. He may succeed in actually eliminating from the system of government the concept of a conflict of interest. And that, to my mind, is a very serious risk. Having said all that, I think it's also important for elites to understand that they have an important role to play in upholding the guardrails, but not a role in terms of constraining majoritarianism, in essentially dictating what is acceptable and what is not acceptable in terms of the way people think and express their views. And I think that is a risk for democracies, and I think elites, of whom there are many in this room, need to be very conscious of not crossing that line. I don't know if that helps.
I'd like to follow up, just to turn the coin over though, Peter, because I agree with the need to strengthen elite institutions, including, as you said, the public service. But I would turn it over. I think it is equally important to continue to support and strengthen civil society organisations. I don't think it is any surprise that as governments move towards authoritarianism, the key way they do it is to try and weaken or remove civil society organisations that can stand up fearlessly to democratic trends. So I think both of those are important together. Strengthening those elite institutions that we talked about, but also strengthening civil society and allowing more opportunity for civil society as organisations and as individuals to find ways of participating in the democratic process beyond voting.
Yeah, and 2 points I'd add before the 2 questions at the back. I mean, I think the onus is on us and leaders across the system to stand up when some of those safeguards are being challenged. And so the Electoral Commission has come under attack in various ways at times, not to the level of sort of other countries, but we should stand up on that. And this cannot sort of be sort of undermined in the way it is in public debate, and use whatever sort of capacity and influences in this room to stand up for what we believe in. That's certainly something that we have to do. The other is I reflect, on this with the Teals. Let's pick the Teals, who are kind of marginalised and attacked all types of different ways. In simple terms, the community felt they weren't being listened to. They weren't a priority. That's what it was. I mean, I'm in Teal country. I know the community. They did not feel they were being listened to. And that's for all parts of politics, all types of leaders. The community, and they're not being listened to short-term, long-term priorities. How do they connect in a way that's meaningful? And I think that goes alongside the systems as well, the safeguards. The more a community feels engaged, those safeguards will remain in place. So, last 2. Oh no, then come back, yep.
Hi. Hi. As a sociologist, I've followed today with a great deal of interest, but it seems to me the main lesson that came out of it for me was the modern nation state was invented in parallel with the growth of literacy and the national newspapers, the national media. In the past 20 years or so, the idea of the nation has dissipated into pockets or bubbles, someone called them, bubbles of interest, focus and culture. How does a national state like Australia create an inclusive, reimagined nation to reintegrate those, particularly young people, who no longer have an identity that's linked to what is now a historic notion of nation?
Christina's going to have a go.
I don't,
Very good question.
I don't really. I think the question's the right question, but I think what we also have to. I have 2 contradictory thoughts. The first one is when we were in Mexico, when my husband was in Mexico, we hosted Anzac Day. Kids, Australian, we'd send out invitations to the backpackers joints around the city, and they all came to the residence for breakfast with an enormous sense of national belonging. And these were backpackers of every ethnic background, and we gave them a lamb chop or something. But they were very moved and very deep about that. And that really gave me a jolt, because whoever it was said they wished they'd been born in the 70s. I'm a 70s kid, and we didn't go to Anzac Day. So I think that there are sources of that thing, but what that national imaginary is going to be, and whether it's going to be national or transnational sub-bits and pieces is another thing. And how do we foster it? Well, I'm not sure that I really want us to foster it. I mean, nationalism always seems to end up in war if we're not too careful. So, I mean, what I'd like to ask is the sociologist, how do you think we ought to move forward? This is not my area. I mean, I think we should have all of the children doing really rigorous philosophy and logic from the time they're 3.
Did you want to add or not? No, you're good. You're good, all right. Great challenge.
Okay.
Yep. Just there, then here. Oh, did you want to... Sally, you go.
Oh, well,
Sally,
yeah, so I just wanted to say that it's a great question, and what fosters belonging is what we found is what actually, even at the micro level, makes a school tick. So a sense of belonging in the school is the thing that determines how the kids in that school do. The other interesting thing is that sense of belonging to a school, there is no one recipe. So, and different things will work in different ways. But if we have trial and error, I'm a big believer in that the scientific mindset and method together with digital technologies, can help us actually learn rapidly and fast about what works. It can empower communities to learn what works in their community, and other communities can learn from that. So communication is key. The one thing I would hate to see shut down is avenues of communication, even if they are not great avenues at the moment. We need to figure out how to fix them, not shut them down.
Right, thanks, Sally. Yep.
Mike, could I just add one point to what Sally said, and that is in a diverse.
Sorry. Yep.
In a diverse country, the only pathway, in my view, to unity is a unity of values. Yes. And I think in Australia's case, that is essentially the values that are built around the concept of a secular, liberal, democratic tradition, together with some distinctively Australian characteristics that give it a certain texture and a certain flavour. Because diversity in and of itself is not a basis for unity.
Yeah. Thank you. Sorry, just the gentleman right there. You got it. Yep.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, Jesus. My name's Des Griffin. I'd like to start with what Peter said, actually. Values, which the absence of shared values, I think, is one of the greatest issues that we need to adopt. And democracy, as I understand it, is based on the proposition that if most people are involved, more people are involved in deciding on what should happen, we're more likely to get sensible decisions. But it's been distorted by special interest groups who wield far too much power, and the process is distorted by the appalling oppositional approach to debate, where people are abused, where positions held by others are abused. And I'm very mindful of the fact that that kind of behaviour feeds into situations where others, ordinary people on the street, feel it's all right to belt the shit out of the people they don't agree with. What we've got, instead of people being kind to each other, is a lot of abuse, as I think Catherine Lumby was talking about, and nothing is done about it. If you think of the debate around the referendum, all kinds of hideous things were said. No attempt was made by a large section of the population to understand the situation, and there are other examples, not least this debate about social media and children. Children aren't asked about anything. The school system, the school education system, is a complete and absolute failure. If you look at it, it's undeniable. All kinds of reasons are given for this, but children are never asked, well, why are you not attending school? Why are you not trying in tests? What do you actually like about school? What do you hate about school? Kids don't have agency. What other area of public policy is there where the people who are going to be affected by it are not asked? Thank you.
Yeah, no, understood. And I think that's come out strongly. I mean, that connection into our young people and trying to bring people together. That polarisation is real. There's a group in the UK, More in Common. Have a look at that, More in Common. They've done some amazing work on debates in terms of bringing people together, encouraging our leaders to think of things through both sides and what's in the middle of that and what's more in common. So we'll do the last couple, 2 or 3. Yep.
Thank you very much, and thanks everybody for a great day. My name's Vince DiPietro, and before I jump in a car and drive 2.5 hours south of the central business district of this fine city, I'd just like to put a couple of thoughts out. And one of the things that I believe we haven't touched on today as a significant threat to democracy in Australia is what I would describe as a disenfranchisement through a lack of attention to detail and investment and return on investment in regional and rural Australia. I had the privilege of leading the local recovery committee into the Currawong bushfire, which destroyed 82% of 4,600 square kilometres of the Shoalhaven. What was really evident during that was that the choices that are available to a person in the cities of trying to get an option for cheaper or different electricity suppliers, the choices available to people in the cities of having decent telecommunications, and the choices available to people in the cities that are not available in the country are really simple things like one road in, one road out of very sensitive and populated areas. Census data gathered in the months of August dictate whether or not we invest in telecommunications and power, which is totally inadequate for the number of people that visit regional and rural Australia in the summer months for Christmas holidays and in the winter months for skiing. The net result of that was that during that fire we had situations where if people could get to a petrol pump they couldn't pump it because the power was out, and if they could pump it they couldn't pay for it because the network was out with the mobile phone coverage. None of that has changed since the Currawong bushfire, and I can give specific examples of having lived examples of exactly why I can prove what I'm saying. A fundamental threat to democracy is if in regional and rural Australia, where I might add almost 85% of our national defence capabilities exists and operates, is largely underserviced and unable to meet another similar disaster or emergency like the Currawong bushfire. We've proven that a couple of times since with COVID and with floods. A real threat to democracy is a loss of trust in the leadership by the people where most of our capabilities lie and the imagery that comes out of those places in disaster.
Yeah, thank you, well said. And I think that's, yeah, absolutely. Rural and regional Australia, I mean, that sentiment is strong. And that's a key element of that loss of trust. And, you know, obviously you did a huge amount of work in that space, so thank you. I know how hard that would have been and how tough it was for those communities. So on a personal level, thank you, but you know, that is absolutely the right challenge here. Now, yep, here, and then, yep. Probably time for 3 more, I think.
So yeah, Erica, again, from RSA. FOMO, fear of missing out. Fear of missing out, I think, is actually quite a big threat to democracy. Probably sounds a bit weird, but the academics call it relative deprivation, and on some levels it actually speaks a bit to Vincent, I think your name was, that you were just talking about before. So it's the idea of comparing yourself to other people and thinking that you're missing out on something because this other group that's just moved into the community or wherever else have got more money, they've got better opportunities, they've got just better stuff than you've got. And obviously, as we've seen in America and other places, politicians can tap into this fear of missing out. And so I guess my question, and really to me the ultimate threat to democracy are other human beings. It's not technology, it's not anything else, it's actually us. Yeah. So when politicians do use things like relative deprivation and the fact that certain constituencies may be missing out on stuff or things or money or opportunities, how can we work with politicians to ensure that they don't fuel these narratives and that they don't use these narratives to undermine the trust in our institutions? Because obviously politicians have got election cycles, they've got votes to win. It's obviously very tempting to use these kind of narratives to win elections.
That's your question.
Well, that's mine. Look, I mean, I'll just give you one example, which kind of hits both sides. So, in terms of the infrastructure requirements across the state, you know, for a long time, you know, infrastructure was done on what was needed politically, or you know, what was attractive across a range of reasons, other than what made most sense for the long-term good of state and/or country. So, trying to restore that trust, setting up an independent authority that actually went through and listed the priority across everything. You know, schools, hospitals, roads, public transport. You know, that was there to kind of put it in the public realm. The government didn't have to follow it, but if they didn't, then they had to explain why they didn't. You know, so it's trying to bring it's a check and balance in terms of infrastructure and making decisions. Yet also, funds were quarantined into regional New South Wales. The economics not as strong for the reasons articulated, but infrastructure still needed across a range of propositions. Now that's not perfect, but the mindset is, you know, governing for all on the best interest long term that's good for the state. And I generally still believe that is an intersection of good policy and good politics. You know, if the long term you have that currency, people will see things being done. They won't have that necessarily. I think that is a sensible decision. There is fair allocation, and I've got trust in the process. A lot of work to do, but you know, I think that sort of approach can help. Yeah. Yep. And then there. Yep. Oh, just here. And drinks are ready. Just.
John Timmins. 3-year terms equals short-term policies, and dare I say, populist decisions. I think UK's 5-year terms might be a little bit too much, but when and how can we get the federal government into 4-year terms?
Yeah, well, I can talk on behalf of McKinnon here. That's one of the programs that we're running, and Peter Shergold's been sort of overseeing that. Leo Neal is here, who works with me at McKinnon. That is a great example of where, when there's an opportunity, you have to jump. And both sides have said that they're open to a 4-year term. Why is that important? Well, under a 3-year term, the first year is implementing the election commitments. The second year you kind of start to do things, and the third year is preparing for the election. It's this constant chaos and turmoil, encouraging short-termism and not long-term. You know, so the 3-year term doesn't make sense. You know, 4 years gives more of a platform. So, and there's research that kind of points to the stability and sort of trust and a whole range of things that come with that tenure. So, but is a government going to spend political capital doing that? Because it's very quickly dropped. It's very quickly, you're just trying to extend your term. So that's where we have to argue. Those outside system with no vested interest have to lead and charge. And so from a McKinnon point of view, we want to lead that debate with a whole group that help, because I think that's a strengthening. That will undoubtedly lead to better public policy, but very hard to be led by government or opposition. But if they're in agreement, you have bipartisanship, that's an approach. And again, you need to engage the community. You need to talk about the benefits and why it makes sense. You know, not just, you know, we want to stay there. So I think that's a good practical issue that could make a difference. Yeah.
I hope you hold that thought, Mike. Ian Walker, New Democracy. Governments of all stripes seem to love regulation. We just saw it yesterday with more social media, seemingly everything. Yet when it comes to democracy, they seem to be devout believers in self-regulation. So to Jenny's point at the beginning of the day, the way out of this is innovation. What motivation for change can come from within a very tight duopoly that likes self-regulation, and is it the job of groups like us to disrupt that?
Yeah, good. Who wants to take that?
My answer is yes. I think it does. I think it needs those pressures to be brought on to governments, to be brought on to parliaments in terms of some of those changes that we want to see. And sometimes I know we can do it through demonstrating things. You've done it yourself with, some of the, direct democracy interventions you've made in sort of trying to prove to politicians that these are new approaches that can work. So I think the answer is yes, and it does depend, I think Peter was saying this, on us to take some responsibility for the extent to which our political leaders want to make the changes that are necessary. And as I say, I think most of those changes is how we enhance those processes of democratic governments, not every 3 or even 4 years, but, for every day of the year.
Yeah, great. So maybe the last one here, and then we will wrap. Sorry.
Thank you. Tibor Molnar, Sydney University. As I get to ask the last question, I think it's almost appropriate. I would like to take the panel and the audience back to the title of our forum for the day, which is Threats to Democracy. To preface my question, there's a question at the end of this.
Yeah.
I'd like to relate a little anecdote I heard from a former treasurer, one Joe Hockey, who was on record as having said that what Australia needs to do is it needs to wind up the economy to create more jobs. Now, what's wrong with that statement? It's backwards. What you need to do is create more jobs and then you get a growing economy, right? In a way, he was talking about treating the symptom and not the cause. Now, I'd like to suggest that for at least some of the day, we've been doing exactly the same thing here. So I'd like to refer to our title. Democracy is a symptom of a good civic society. Mm-hmm. If you have a good, working, egalitarian, idealistic, imagine whatever you like, you've got a really good working society, you get good democracy for free. That's what a good democracy is. So in a way, and I think Philip Pettit pointed it out this morning, and Peter Shergold referred to it just a few minutes ago, we shouldn't be talking about threats to democracy because there are none. Democracy is an epiphenomenon. What we really should be talking about is threats to a civic society. I think that's where the real issue is. So what I'd like to ask the panel is, what can we do, not to fiddle around the edges and treat the symptoms, but to address some of the really fundamental issues that are threatening our civic society? Thank you.
Right. Okay. So we had a day on threats. We had a day on threats to democracy. There is none. So let's go to drinks. No, good point. And it's complicated. I think they're connected. I don't think they're separate. They're definitely connected. But who wants to have a reflection?
I would just say, in that polycentric model that we had this morning, it's up to all of us to do what we can, and I think that's the best we. Okay, look, there we go. Now we can go. Now we can.
And it's third spaces like this. Yes. It's what's happening, and thank you so much for organising it. But it is these spaces that try to address what you were referring to.
And I think that's right. And I think that, like in any day like this, you're not necessarily going to get everything you want or see, or the issues debated your way. But as a collection, I think we covered a range of things, a range of ideas, identified some threats but also opportunities that give us an opportunity in various ways that stakeholders are involved. So I will leave it there. Now, can I just finish by saying to the Governor, thank you so much, Your Excellency, for coming back. Great opening this morning, and for lending us your house. It's fantastic. And to all the staff, thank you for making it happen. You did an amazing job today. So, And the Royal Society, congratulations. I genuinely think these sort of days are helpful. Certainly from my point of view, I've been challenged. The work we do, I think, is going to be shaped in some way out of the work, and so many people involved. And there's a connection. The more people who work together on this, the greater chance we have of success. So thank you to everyone that's participated, the work you do for coming along. And with that, I did say early, it's only 4 minutes early, but drinks are served. So thanks very much.